So Tekken 8's been out a little over a month, and let me tell you, I'm having so much fun playing this game. My friends and I have spent countless hours running sets against each other with our favorite characters, then going off on our own to spend more hours in practice mode and playing ranked in order to hone our skills only to come back better and ready to show off what we've learned in our next session. This gameplay loop, although not totally original from any other notable fighting games you might have heard of before, definitely does have something special about it in my mind that's kept me coming back to it since my first introduction to the franchise as a cringy 8-year-old kid who begged and pleaded his mom to rent out a copy of Tekken 3 at our local Blockbuster because something was special about that guy with the tall spiky hair, red gloves, and lightning irradiating off of them just screamed the pinnacle of awesome to me. And we never returned that copy to the store, by the way. Roughly 2 decades later, I find myself looking back on the legacy of Tekken and why it stands out to fans of the series like myself. Does this fighting game franchise truly deserve the praise it gets from its followers, who've amassed huge crowds at tournaments like EVO and CEO with prizes ranging up to $1 million? Or is Tekken just a copium-filled dream, overhyped by kids like myself who grew up with it? I'll let you come to that conclusion as we take a brief glimpse into why I believe Tekken is so special. But first, before we continue, please take a moment to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel, as it helps me know that you guys are interested in this kind of content, and if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. Every bit of engagement means the world, and without further ado, let's get back to 5 reasons I think Tekken is special. 1. Starting off our list at number 1 is the characters. Over the course of Tekken's life, the game has seen its fair share of roster changes, starting with a humble 10-man roster from the first arcade version of Tekken, which was later updated to 18 after the first game got ported to the original PlayStation, all the way up to later installments that go as high as 60 characters. But I already know what some of you are saying. Just because a roster is large doesn't make anything special about them. Sometimes less is more. And my answer to you would be, you're absolutely right, and I agree. In fact, the roster's been refined more to around 30-ish characters in the newer games to prioritize balancing and uniqueness between character choices. This also leads into my next point, and arguably the most important reason Tekken is special. 2. Number 2 being the combat. There's just something so special about the fighting in this game. Whether you're a veteran who's been playing the game for years, or maybe you just decided to pick up the game recently because your friends convinced you to buy it, there's just so much fun to be had at all skill levels if you're willing to give the game a chance. With most characters having over 100 different moves, it might seem intimidating at first, and I'd be lying if I said the learning curve wasn't a little steep. But I can pretty much guarantee you, after you spam a few buttons on a character for a while, there's a pretty good chance you're going to press something, and it's going to look cool. The first thing you're going to want to say is, "That's awesome, now how do I do it?" This will probably be enough to encourage you to play the practice mode, which is an amazing tool that really helps you flesh out your favorite characters and takes you from simply button mashing to a Tekken god who's a combo specialist of which the world has never seen. Or, if you're like me, just good enough to beat your friends and have bragging rights until somebody beats you next time. Another thing that's awesome about the combat in Tekken is that 80 to 90% of the knowledge you learn from a character in one Tekken game can cross over to later installments, or if you even end up going back to older titles for comparison. Take my guy Kazuya Mishima here for example. He's been here since day 1 of Tekken when the franchise took its first steps, and over the span of 30 years, man, I feel old just thinking that, Kazuya and many other characters like him have had decades of fine-tuning to their movesets with additional moves and combo updates added to them over time. This makes taking time to master a character so rewarding. It means that you can be playing a character for over 30 years and still find new ways to adjust your game while having fun, as not only is your character evolving over the course of each installment, but you continue to evolve as a player who has the legacy knowledge carried over from each Tekken. And speaking of legacy, that leads me to my next reason. 3. Tekken has the longest ongoing story in any fighting game franchise to date, spanning over the course of 8 main game titles and several spin-off games like the Tekken Tag series and a few handheld titles. In the best paraphrasing of the main story that I can, everything is centered around a family grudge match between father and son that plays out like a soap opera on steroids that would leave Dr. Phil needing therapy if he even attempted to intervene. Basically, things start out with our main protagonist of Tekken 1, Kazuya Mishima, a kind and well-mannered boy born into the world with his loving father, Heihachi Mishima. If by loving, I meant complete jackass who mercilessly trains his 5-year-old martial arts by beating him to the point where he's left bloodied and nearly unalive at the end of each training session, then yeah, loving. And if the constant violence wasn't bad enough, eventually Heihachi just decides Kazuya isn't worth his time and proceeds to throw his 5-year-old son off a cliff ravine to his death. Except it wasn't in fact Kazuya's death, because then we wouldn't have a story that spans 30 years and 8 Tekken games later. No, what happens next is Kazuya does not die, but in fact is reborn in a sense, as the near-death experience awakens a dark entity within him that would be later known as the Devil Gene, which is derived from the god of chaos and destruction from ancient times, that honestly I just don't have enough time in the day to cram into this video. The main thing you need to know is that basically the Devil Gene within Kazuya turns the once pure-hearted child into the physical embodiment of Black Air Force One energy. Kazuya would then spend the rest of his childhood life training in secret from his father until the day he would be ready to take his revenge from Heihachi, which years later the opportunity would come when we find out Heihachi is a lucrative and powerful man who quote-unquote inherited the vast mega company corporation created and established by Jinpachi Mishima, aka Heihachi's father. With the financial backing of Heihachi's mega company, he can basically do whatever he wants, because he pretty much controls a large portion of the world by being a leader in mass producing weapons of war, with pretty much having everything a man could want, like a literal bowling lane accompanied with Heihachi shaped bowling pins and a literal bear that he trained Mishima style karate. Heihachi grows bored and feels like he needs a challenge to further show the world that he's the most powerful man on the planet. Cue the first King of Iron Fist tournament, otherwise known as Tekken. A tournament that gathers all the world's greatest fighters with offers of fame and fortune if they can best their fellow opponents and ultimately Heihachi Mishima in the end. Seizing this opportunity, our main protagonist Kazuya enters the tournament and unleashes his newly acquired Black Air Force One energy on all of his opponents until he finally meets his father Heihachi in the grand finals. They have their first of many final confrontations, until Kazuya strikes a decisive blow and leaves Heihachi unconscious and defeated. Now is the part where typically in these stories, the main character learns a lesson about how revenge is not the answer, and real strength comes from forgiveness. Nope, not in Tekken. Kazuya then proceeds to take Heihachi to a cliff and throw his old man off the edge, just as he had happened to him all those years back, killing Heihachi in the process. Except, it didn't kill Heihachi. Somehow he survives the fall, because apparently all Mishima family members have super gravity and pain resistant bodies that allows them to keep coming back from stuff like this. Anyway, the first story ends with Kazuya getting his revenge and taking over the Mishima Zaibatsu from his father, until the sequel, where Heihachi pulls a reverse Uno and trains in secret, enters the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2, this will become a reoccurring theme by the way, hosted by Kazuya this time, and guess what? Heihachi wins. I can go on and on about the story of the Mishima family and how this feud just keeps on getting crazier and crazier. In fact, I haven't even started talking about all the side characters that are doing things in the background while Tekken is happening. For instance, there's a famous masked wrestler who speaks only in Jaguar. He enters the tournament in order to raise money for his children's orphanage that he runs, with the special ending that if you beat the arcade mode, you're surrounded by awkward cutscenes of real people dancing around a nightmare-fueled CGI king, which is glorious by the way. But there are plenty of other amazing content creators who've already covered stuff like this, and maybe if you want to see some stuff from me in the future, I'd be happy to cover that. My final summary of the main story is that Tekken is kind of like the Fast and Furious movies. The movies started out with people just driving cars and racing, and as the series continues, there's still cars, but now we're in space. Well, Tekken started off with fighting, and though there's still fighting going on, somehow we ended up in space.
4.
If you're familiar with the esports scene, then you're no stranger to witnessing the greatest players from all over the world competing for high-stakes prizes and recognition driven by the fans of the community for their respective game. Tekken is no exception to this. With its large Coliseum-like atmosphere, fans flock to major tournaments in support of their favorite pros with the hopes of being part of a historic esports moment. And believe me, Tekken has no shortage of them. From players like Arsenal and Ash, who cemented themselves to be arguably one of the greatest Tekken players in the world, by putting Pakistan on his back and carrying his country to the competitive mainstream, forcing the world to recognize just how good the players were, to players like Lil Majin, who became a fan favorite overnight, playing some of the most entertaining sets witnessed with his trademark character King and suplexing some of the greatest gods of Tekken on his way to an amazing EVO run. Or even when the godfather and creator of Tekken himself, Harada, pulled up to the EVO tournament and not only showed up, but beat a few players to cement that unlike other game companies, looking at you Ubisoft, the head director of the game actually connected to the project and cared about their game beyond the money it could have generated. To me, that's something special about a game community that can rally behind the development team because both sides have a mutual understanding of each other and what's good for the game. Which ties to my last point of what makes Tekken so special. It's us, the fans. Think about it. Most games nowadays on release have one shot to make a good impression before everyone just writes them off, and that couldn't be more true when you think about the recent Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. That's pretty much dead on arrival because they didn't craft a game that fans actually want to come back to. I think a lot of modern games could learn a thing or two from games like Tekken. They just focused on creating a fun experience that's easy to just hop into, and they did this by listening to their players in order to craft something that we can come back to from day to day. Sure, it's not the perfect game, but you gotta admit, after 30 years of game releases and the fans all over the world flocking to tournaments and game conventions to show their love for a game, they definitely are doing something right. So that's my 5 reasons I think Tekken is special, but I'd like to hear from you guys. What about Tekken to you is special that made you pick up the game? Let me know down in the comments below, and thank you for watching this video if you're still here. Your support just means so much, and please don't hesitate to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel as I post more content like this in the future. Take care, and I'll see you guys on the next video.